So, Chris Hani, I'm not a fan. Don't think he was a hero. Did he deserve to die? I don't know. Just another commie, really. But what we really want to talk about is his killer and the weird things happening around that. So, Byron, did you know that his killer was, of course, paroled due to the Constitutional Court? And now the killer, Janice something Wallace, two things
Polish
have
dude.
happened since then. He's been granted permanent residence to serve his parole in South Africa, and he's always been stabbed to death 30 years after entering prison. My alarm bells are ringing.
Yeah. So I don't really know much about Chris Hani, and I find that greatly ironic because apparently, if you believe the news, everybody knows about Chris Hani. Like he's a struggle icon to everybody. Except I've asked around my office, man. Nobody seems to know who the guy is. So I know he was some commie who got assassinated during the apartheid era, and he was all against the downfall of apartheid. And I know supposedly he built a school or a hospital. I don't know, something like that. But anyway, he's apparently a hero to a lot of people. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I was
no
kind of
people we could
confused.
find, of course.
Yeah, apart from the commies rarely seem to like the guy, which does then bring into question, well, the commies really like him because he's a commie, and the guy who killed him was a Polish whose country was enslaved by commies. And so, because it was enslaved by commies and they saw the brutality of the Russian commie regime, they became deeply anti commie.
Hmm.
So, what you find is that the ideology of the day, the 70s, when the Soviet Union still existed and the ANC still seemed like it had some kind of credibility. I'm not sure to who, but apparently somebody did. Those days were, simpler, war kind of days in the world conflicts. I mean, we still hadn't got to the 2020s where we made everybody stay home and watch their grandmother die over Zoom. So, life was simpler back then. But with all that being said,
Hmm.
is it any kind of surprise that a guy raised in the 70s would be deeply anti communistic when he comes through from Poland? And with that being said, why is he still being judged as the worst thing since Saddam Hussein when he is a victim to a degree of the time that he was raised in, specifically also knowing he has been deeply remorseful for the act that he's done, which is far more than Jacob Zuma. I mean, Jacob Zuma has never apologized for capturing the country or committing most of the people to live in squalor. So,
Hmm.
arguably, morally, he's actually done better than Zuma. And yet, according to everybody else, he's the world's largest war criminal, apparently.
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly, you know, Janice Wallace, the killer of Chris Hani, is remorseful apparently for it. Who isn't remorseful, of course, is the ANC for killing off all the black opposition in the
Mm.
80s, of which Chris Hani was an important factor. Is that as the commander of the MK at the time, they, set fire to people, police officers, teachers, Zulus, anyone who wasn't at the ANC. The People's War was horrifically brutal, black on black violence, and Chris Hani was an instigator and a perpetrator of that. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to claim martyrdom or apologize for any of that, but thankfully his killer had. So, what do you think of this idea that the killer's granted parole and now he's granted permanent residence in South Africa to serve that parole? As I said before, alarm bells are
Yeah.
ringing because if he has information linking perhaps some elements of the ANC to Chris Hani's death, of which there's a few conspiracy theories around it, which
Hmm.
I tend to believe, if I'm really honest with you, why would they want him in South Africa? Possibly because it's easier to knock him off if he opens his mouth once he's out of prison.
Yeah. To talk about that more, we will be right back after a word from our sponsor, Bitfast.
Let's be honest, Bitcoin is by far the best performing asset of the last decade, and a lot of people are using Bitcoin to hedge themselves against government overreach and fiat currency debasement, otherwise known as inflation. And that's why the guys over at Bitvice have developed their latest product, Sat Stacker. Essentially, you set a debit order, you accumulate Bitcoin every single month. Your Bitcoin won't be on an exchange, it won't be in anyone's hands, it will be directly deposited into your private wallet. So accumulate Bitcoin today, and every single month you set the price, you set the frequency, SatStacker does all the rest. In order to get started, click the link in the description below. And we are back. So, tell me, Byron, do they want to kill Janice Wallace once he exits prison?
Well, I want to remind you that there was a place where actually I was born around Toti. And there's a shopping centre in Toti, which is very famous because back in the days, the ANC MK vets decided, it would be a good idea. Let's plant some bombs there and kill a bunch of school children because that's who inevitably were killed by said bombing. And Ramon, I'm sure you may recall that the ANC thought, it would be a really good idea. Let's name some of the main roads in Toti after the guy who planted the bomb that maimed loads of people in that province.
Yeah.
So there were people that had to drive up and down this road every day whose children had either been killed or maimed by the ANC. And if you really think about it, you have to go, okay, well, the ANC were not very remorseful for the damage that they did to the people at the time. And here we have a guy who is very deeply remorseful and says, I'm very sorry for what I did. I was a victim of the Soviet era. And yes, he was, I suppose, to a large degree. But because he killed a commie, he's still deemed to be the son of Satan. But when the commies kill little innocent children, well, they're heroes, mate. Let's name the streets after them. Yay! Commie
Yeah,
logic, mate.
it is commie logic. So you get monuments to like the worst people in the world. Speaking of monuments, Chris Hani had a monument
Hmm.
in at Kuleni, which is some shithole place in Gauteng somewhere, and unfortunately it was vandalized. But based on the pictures, I can't tell whether this is the before or after picture because most of South Africa looks vandalized for the most part. So people
Hmm.
are outraged that there's vandalism. It looked like a towel fell off during high winds or something. Like that's what it looks like to me. Whether it's been vandalized or not, I have my sincere doubts. But there's all these weird things where you got parole for the killer. He must serve his parole in South Africa as a permanent resident. And now, most recently, breaking news, he was stabbed in prison yesterday, 30 years after he stepped into prison and was a model prisoner.
Hmm.
Something's not adding up here.
Yeah, and it's interesting that apparently the reason that he's been granted now the ability to stay in South Africa is because he actually didn't have citizenship. So he's been held here basically without citizenship because of the crime that he committed. So technically, when he's released, the first thing he should do is, well, get deported. And if he goes back to Poland, well, apparently the Polish actually are going to give him a hero's welcome. Now, for those of you who may be black supremacists watching our show going, these bloody whiteys are always celebrating the whiteys. Like, it actually isn't around his race. What they are actually is deeply, how should we say, in awe of a man who stood up to communism, especially given that their country was deeply affected by the communist regimes. Also, remembering that their former colonial masters, the Russians, for those of you who don't believe that the Russians were colonialists, well, they were, their former communist masters to the side of them is currently fighting a war with Ukraine, which does mean that there is some kind of tension going on between the potential communist type mentality and that of the free market West, if you will. Although I would question whether the free market is actually in play in the West anymore, whether the West has just
Yeah,
been captured by communism. That's
I
a
would.
segment in another time. But that being said, they see this guy as a potential hero against the commies. And naturally, the commies don't want him to go there and get a hero's welcome. So their solution for this is, well, let's keep him in the shithole that is South Africa. And that will be pretty much punishment enough. And we agree.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the guy hasn't made money in 30 years. Does he have any belongings or assets in South Africa? I have absolutely no idea. Does he have family here? I don't think so. So where on earth is he going to serve his parole? Or is the state?
Alicia.
I don't know. Is the state going to give him housing? Like that seems
Apparently, the
like.
state have to.
But then it seems
I
like a
read.
worse punishment than prison.
Hmm. I read somewhere actually that the states have to provide him with protective custody because his life has apparently been in danger, and he's been told that when he leaves there, he's going to be subject to, you know, like the daughter of the Zuma we're not allowed to name, her basically getting together a bunch of like angry women with pot pans and going there and pot panning him to death. So apparently his life's a danger, and he will be subject to state surveillance, if you will, because he's going to have to be treated as a how should we say, a guy in disguise, I suppose. But With that being said, mate, like I reckon that guy could walk around halfway around Johannesburg and nobody would know who the freak he is. I mean, I didn't even know who he was until the headlines hit. Did you?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't know what he looks like either. No recordings have been sent of him post the TRC '94. But speaking of someone on parole, like Eugene de Kock, the head of Vlak Blaas, and was accused of ambushing and murdering people, and I don't know what else. Basically, he's been given like a lifelong salary from the state on parole. Like almost he's like being paid to either keep quiet or maybe this is humanitarian in some way. So maybe they'll have the same sort of arrangement with Janice in this regard. It's all just very strange. I don't know. They're forced to release him on parole thanks to the court. He gets stabbed soon thereafter. He gets granted permanent residence soon after that. The vandalization of the Chris Hani monument. I don't know. Something doesn't add up. Like, get paroled and go back to Poland, man. Like,
Mm.
that makes the most sense. But all this other bullshit doesn't.
Yeah, but they don't want him to go back to Poland because the minute he lands up in Poland, they're going to be like, "Yay, anti-communist hero rocks up." And so they obviously don't want to say that the majority of people don't like communism. So what they actually want to say is like, oh, he's going to be a white supremacist, and he's all going to be a symbol to the white supremacists. Actually, that's Poland don't need that. They have that in Ukraine. I don't know if we're allowed to say that, but you know, just check Zelensky's army. I mean, there's plenty of photos of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, with that all being said, like he's going there as a deeply anti-communist guy, and it's amazing that all the left don't really want that to happen. So all we hear in Parliament all day long is how this guy's apparently the worst person ever because he happened to shoot a former commie, and all of their brothers who bombed shopping malls and planted things and maimed school children and necklaced and tied each other as well. They were all liberation fighters, and a mandla to them.
Mm.
So, commie logic, mate. What can I say? Personally, I agree with you. Taxpayer money isn't really the best served kind of keeping the guy around, is it? It's like let him go back to Poland, let him be Poland's problem.
Yeah.
Otherwise we have to have VIP protection for the guy, give him a house, pay for his food. I mean, to me, what am I saying? I'm an idiot, man. It's an opportunity for a tender. So,
Yeah.
actually, it lubes the patronage network. So,
Yeah. I mean,
hey, who knows?
who does this
Maybe a
guy think?
communist will get the tender.
Who does this guy think he is? A minister? Come now. Anyway, that's the show for today. Thank you for watching, everyone. See you tomorrow. Cheers.
Cheers.